Hey Defenders, welcome back. In this video I want to show you guys how we can use Wazuh and the active response feature to prevent disallowed software from being executed on our Windows endpoints. And what I mean by that is, say within our environment we have very strict software policy and we only want to allow software that has been whitelisted within our environment to be able to be ran on our Windows endpoints. Well, first, we need a way to detect when a disallowed software or application has been launched on our Windows endpoint, and then combining that with Wazuh's active response feature, we can actually terminate that process from being ran in real time. And what this allows us to do is to prohibit any users or any software that installs, say malware gets on the box that installs their applications. If those applications are not approved within our environment, those applications will be terminated. And so now we'll have a very strict policy on what can run and what cannot run on our Windows endpoints. And that'll be more clear as we kind of get into it here. So first, a few prereqs. We will need sysmon, which you guys should be familiar with already, Powershell 7, and PS tools. And ultimately what this will allow us to do is, so let's say within my environment, I do not want to allow Google Chrome to be able to be ran on our Windows endpoint. So if I am a user, so if I try to open Google Chrome, let's see what happens. So Google Chrome has been ran. We see that the application has now been suspended to where I cannot interact with Google Chrome at all. So we get our balloon pop up saying that the application has been suspended, and then it's killed, right? So now as an end user, if Google Chrome is not whitelisted within my environment, I can actually not interact with it at all, and allows us to set very strict software policies into what is allowed to be launched within our environment and what is not allowed to be launched within. And again, I want to give a special shout out to fellow Defender 1 again, who I'll link to his GitHub down in the description below, and this will be the documentation we will follow to make this work. And really special shout out to him for the creativity and putting something like this together for the community to use. So stick around and we'll jump into it. And alright, so first things first, we need to get sysmon, which I've covered and I'll link to in the description below if you do not have sysmon installed, PowerShell 7 installed, and PS tools installed. And this needs to be installed on our Windows endpoint, right? So first things first, we have sysmon. So if I open our event viewer here and scroll into applications and services, and scroll down into Microsoft Windows, and we scroll down to our sysmon logs that we see here. So what we're going to do is, when a process is created, so you see within our sysmon logs, when we launch a process, we see the company that has signed off on this particular software, right? So if we do the same for, let's see if we can find our Google Chrome one. So you'll notice when I launch Google Chrome here, we'll get an event for a process creation within our event viewer. So if I refresh this guy, we will see our process creation, which will probably be this first guy here. So here, when we see our process creation for when we launched our Chrome executable, we see that the company associated with the software is Google LLC. Well, this company is not approved within our Wazuh list to be able to be ran on our Windows endpoint. So when I try to run it, Wazuh sees, hey, this is a company that has not been approved, and I'm going to run the active response, which takes advantage of our PS tools to actually suspend and then kill the application from being able to be ran. And PS tools can be installed very easily. I will link to the URL in the description below to download PS tools, but essentially what you'll do is you'll just download this guy. It'll be a zip folder So if I go into my file explorer here and go into downloads, you see our PS tools, and what we'll need to do is extract this guy. So I'll just extract it to PS tools. And now if we go into our PS tools folder, you'll see some of the you'll see all the executables that we'll need to be able to make this feature work, right? So we're going to take advantage of PS kill. We'll take advantage of PS suspend and PS exec 64. So once you have those downloaded onto your Windows endpoint, we'll be able now to set up this feature now within Wazuh. So if we scroll back up in our GitHub, in Juan's GitHub here, you'll see we first need to create a CDB list with the approved software vendors. And again, this correlates to the company name that comes in with our alert, for example. So here we see the company name that is stripped out when we launch Chrome is Google LLC. And so how is this working under the hood? Well, we're going to take advantage of Wazuh's ability to create CDB lists to list out what company's software we want to allow to be ran on our Windows endpoints, and then we're going to create custom rules that will detect when a company name that is not within our CDB list has executed some type of software, right? Whether that be Chrome, whether that be Sublime, Notepad, whatever software is trying to be ran on the Windows endpoint. And then with that rule, if we have a match, we're then going to trigger active response to run our PS tools that will suspend the application and then kill the application immediately after, so that we disallow users from being able to interact with and execute unapproved software. So here you see here Google has not been approved, so now my active response is being triggered that has suspended the software, and then we get our little balloon pop up here, and then a second later the application has now been killed, right? And so we are taking advantage of Wazuh's CDB list. We are going to create a custom rule set that will detect when a company name has not, right? So with this not match key, is not within our list of approved software vendors. And then after that, we are going to then create our active response that will call our PS suspend command, which will run our PowerShell script down below. So first things first, we need to create our CDB list. So if we go onto our manager here, we will need to navigate into the directory where our lists are actually reside. So if we go into var, osec, etc, go into list, we'll see the Wazuh lists that come pre-bundled by default with Wazuh. However, we want to create our own, and thankfully we have the ability to do that. So here I'll just create a text file, and I'll just call it software-vendors. And here I'll copy Juan's example of approved software that we want to be able to be executed, approved software associated with these companies below. So I'll copy this endpoint here. I will paste this in. Notice we do need the colon after every entry here. If you don't have that, Wazuh won't be able to compile this list. So I'll save this guy off. As you see here, we don't have, you see our other default lists have our .cdb extension here. So we need to tell Wazuh, hey, I want you to compile this list. So we first create our list, and then we go into our osec.conf here. So we go into var, osec, etc, osec.conf, and we will need to scroll down to our list. So if we scroll down, here, you will see our rule set tag within our osec.conf. And here, Wazuh, by default, right, by the list that they provide with the default install are here. So we need to tell Wazuh, hey, Wazuh, I want you to also add our software vendors list. So if I just copy this block here, and instead of security channel, I will say software-vendors, or whatever name or whatever name of the list that you just created. So here we called it software vendors, and again that reflects what I have here. However, before reinstalling our manager, we need to assign the correct permissions to this. So I will assign the ownership to the OSEC user and the OSEC group so that Wazuh can actually read this file. And then we also need to change execution. So here I think we'll just say 750, I believe. So we'll change this to 660. And okay, so our execution permissions are correct and our ownership and group are correct. So now let's restart our manager here, and we'll see that our software vendors will be compiled and we'll get our CDB extension here. So we're gonna restart Wazuh manager, and once this restarts, we will see our list as being compiled. So if we now clear and then list this out, you will see Wazuh has now compiled our list. So that looks good. And then within our web UI here, if we go into Wazuh, if we go into management, you will see a tab for CDB list, and we'll see our software vendors list resides here, and you'll see our entries, right? So that directly reflects to what we inputted. If I list this out, that directly reflects to our inputs here. So that looks good. Okay, now let's create our rule that will detect when software has been executed that is signed by a company not within our list, right? So if we go back to Juan's repo here, that he's already created a rule that we can take advantage of. So go ahead and copy this guy. So if we go into our local rules file on our manager, so this is again our rules file where we add our custom rules. So I'll go into rules, say local rules, and I'll scroll down to the bottom here, and we will copy the default rule that has been created and paste that value here. And let's kind of step through, and I will actually need to make a change to my if signature ID, right? So we're giving this rule a unique rule ID, and we only want this rule to be triggered if the parent rule of 61603 fires. However, in my case, if I go to my own sysmon rules that I've created, you notice that event 61603, which Juan calls out, I actually have this rule ID trigger instead, which is 101.101. So this rule ID is looking for the event 1 process creation, which if we go back to our event viewer, that is this guy here, and I actually have that rule ID trigger instead of 61603. So if you've just installed sysmon and haven't done any custom sysmon rules on top of it, then you can use the value 61603 and you should work. However, again, I've created a different child rule off of that. So my rule ID is actually going to be this value here, because again, if I go into Wazuh, for my process creations that I get, my rule ID here is 101.101. So I'll need to replace that value. I'll need to replace the 61603 with that rule ID here. And then we're going to look at the field event data, win.eventdata.company. And that correlates to, if we go into Wazuh, we open our fields for the process creation. So in this example, the field that came in with this process creation is the Microsoft Corporation. So that is what that's the field we are going to look at. And then we're going to look up and say, hey, does this company that is within this field, does it not match what is in our list here of approved software vendors? So this rule will trigger if the text that is associated with our win.event.data.company field does not match any values within our list here. And off of that, we're going to trigger a description of, hey, the process was started but was not allowed by our software policy. And this is not doing any, this won't do any actively killing of the process. So this will not, we haven't enabled the active response to trigger yet. So maybe if you don't want to be as paranoid and as strict and kill processes that aren't approved, but you want to be made aware of a process starting that hasn't been approved, then this rule will detect on that. And this is also the rule that we're going to use to trigger our active response that will kill the application. So, and then you'll see some metadata. So we're adding it to our MITRE tag here. We're stating the no full log. I have seen that this is actually important to get the active response to work. I've seen that if you don't include the no full log, it won't be able to parse out the JSON that the manager sends back to the agent when doing the active response. So make sure if you want to enable the active response feature that you use this options no full log flag, and then we're going to add these other groups to it. So we're saying sysmon event 1 and software policy. So if I go ahead and save this off and let's restart our manager here to load in this new rule, we will then, once this loads, let's see what we got here. Invalid root element only group is allowed. Oh, what did I do here? Let's see. Oh, we didn't give it the group tag. So I'll say group. I'll say group space name equals. I'll just say process creation. I'll close it and then add our closing tag, and then also close out the group tag here. And we will restart again. And okay, good. We got a clean restart. So now let's launch Chrome again. So I'll exit out of this. I will double click and launch Chrome, which will again trigger our sysmon event viewer as process creation. This will be sent to our Wazuh manager. It'll compare this company name within our list, and if it doesn't match, we'll trigger our alert, our rule that we just created. So if I now refresh this guy, we should now see that the process was created but is not allowed by our software policy. And here, if we scroll down, we now see this value here. We see our new rule triggering, right? So this rule is saying, hey, we saw Google Chrome started a process, but they are not allowed within our software policy. So again, if we expand this out and look at our event data company name, we see it is signed by Google LLC, right? And this is not a value that resides within our list. But let's say, so I'll now filter on this guy, and let's say now we do want to add this company, this Google LLC, to our approved software list. So I'll just copy this value here. I'll go back onto my manager, and if we open our software vendors list, let's now just add this value here. So Google LLC is the company, and then again I need to add the colon at the end here. So we'll save that off. I will go ahead and do a restart, and now when we launch Chrome again, we won't see that rule ID trigger because that is now an approved software vendor. So once that restarts, I will get back onto my agent here. Let me exit out of this guy. And it looks like that's restarted. So now I'll launch Chrome again, and we will now not see that alert come through. If we go into Wazuh and we refresh on this guy, you see we're now not getting a new alert for that same event, right? Because Google Chrome is now whitelisted. So if I refresh a few times, we are now seeing that, hey, Google Chrome is now approved, so we're not triggering our disallowed software policy. However, what if now I launch something else like Sublime? So if I go ahead and launch Sublime here, and I'll cancel this off, we'll see that we will get an alert now for Sublime because Sublime is not an approved company name. So if I go ahead and refresh this, you see we now get another alert process Sublime text started, but is not allowed by the software policy, because if we look at their company name here, their company name is the Sublime HQ, right? And that is not a part of our list. So good. So we're now getting alerts for software that has been launched that is not an approved software vendor. So now let's add some active response onto this, right? Because this would alert our security team that, hey, a process is getting launched that's not approved, but is still ultimately executing, right? And is still executing on the endpoint, right? There's no proactive defense in place. So if we go back into our GitHub here, let's now create our active response. So kind of similar to what we did with the DNS hunting, we will create an executable that we'll put within our active response binary directory on our agent that will then call our PowerShell script, which is this block down here. Let's now create our PowerShell script, which will call our PS kills tools, so PS exec, PS suspend, and PS kill, that will ultimately kill the application without allowing the user to interact with it at all. Right? So I'll go ahead and copy this script here, the contents of the script. I'll go back onto my Windows endpoint and I'll just use Notepad to then paste the contents of that here. However, we will need to make a few changes. We will need to make sure that, so by default, Juan's script here points to, he has his PS exec tool, or his PS kill tools within program files, sysinternals. However, on my Windows endpoint, those actually reside within my downloads directory here. So here you'll see my executables, my PS exec, my PS suspend, and then my PS kill as well. So I'll need to make that change on my end. So I'll just copy. I will copy the directory where I have these guys and erase these values here and just paste them in here. So you want to make sure that you are pointing to where your PS tools executables actually reside. And I need to add my slash here and like that. Okay, so good. So now Windows knows when it runs this PowerShell script that the executables reside in this directory. So I'll go ahead and save this guy, and we are going to save it as our pssuspend.ps1. And this script can reside anywhere on your endpoint. So it doesn't matter the directory that you put this guy in, but I'm just going to throw him into my downloads directory. And I'll go ahead and say all files. Then we'll save it as pssuspend.ps1. And alright, so we'll exit out of that guy. If we go into downloads, we now see that our pssuspend resides here, right? And so that looks good. Now let's create the executable that Wazuh will use during the active response to call our pssuspend PowerShell script. So I'll go ahead and copy this guy and open Notepad again and paste the contents of that in there. However, you see we are not pointing to where our PowerShell script resides. Mine is under my downloads. So I'll go ahead and remove that path there. And then copy my downloads directory. Whoops. And copy my downloads directory and paste that guy there, and then add my slash. There we go. Alright, good. And now let's save this guy. However, we're going to save it into our active response directory so that the Wazuh agent can actually call this script. So I'll go into program files, 86, OSEC agent, active response. I'll go into my bin directory here, and you'll see our other executables that we have for active response. So I will go ahead and call this pssuspend.cmd, paste that guy there, save it off, and okay. Now if we go into active response, go into bin, and then try to run this guy, we won't get anything, which is good. It hasn't bombed out yet or anything, and if we add some contents and then fail, it'll bomb out. But at least we know that it's able to call our PowerShell script that we just added, so that's good. So now let's tell our Wazuh manager to enable this active response feature, and what we're going to do is copy this block here. So go ahead and copy this guy. Let's jump onto our Wazuh manager, and let's go into our osec.conf file. And if I scroll down to my active response blocks, go ahead and paste that guy here. So we're telling our Wazuh manager, hey, the executable that you're going to run on the agent will be this pssuspend.cmd, which correlates exactly to what we have here within our active response binary bin directory. So that'll be the command that will be called. And when do we want that command to be ran? Well, we want that command to be ran when our rules group software policy is observed. So if we go back into the rule that we created, you'll see that if we scroll down here, our rule groups associated with this, we see our software_policy is associated with this particular rule group. So anytime Wazuh sees a rule ID trigger that is also associated with this rule group, it'll go ahead and run the active response, which will call this pssuspend command on the Wazuh agent, right? So that looks good. Let's go ahead and save this off and go ahead and restart our manager here. So now let's go ahead and give this a shot. So let's go ahead and try to launch Sublime, which should be a unapproved software. However, nothing is happening. We're still able to interact with it, and it's not being killed. So why is that? Well, what we'll need to do is if we go into our, why is that? So if we go into our PowerShell script here, and let's look at the contents of this guy. So here you can see one of our variables here is we're parsing out the alert.arule.agroups field, and we're grabbing the third element in this array. So, and by default, WAN has us grabbing the third element of this array, where if I go back into my UI here and scroll down to our rule groups, you see we have two array elements. We have our process creation sysmon event, and we have our software policy. Now we have our active response to trigger off of our software policy rules group. So why isn't this triggering? Well, again, the PowerShell script is grabbing the third element in the array for this particular field, alert.rule.groups, where I actually don't have a third element within that array. I only have two. So I'll need to change this number to match where the rule.group software_policy exists within this array. So by default, arrays are your first field is 0, and then your second field is 1, your third field is 2, and so on and so forth. So I don't have a third element, right? So I have my process creation is the first element in the array, which would be a value of 0, and then I want it to look for software_policy as the second element in the array, which would actually be 1, because the 0 element would pertain to this guy. So on my PowerShell script here, I will change that value from 3 to 1. And I'll go ahead and save that guy off and exit out of this. Now let's try to launch Sublime again. So now if I launch Sublime again, you'll see that, oh, I can't interact anymore. So the application has been suspended, and now it's been killed. So here we see our Sublime text editor is being started but is not allowed by a software policy. And then we see our active response start to kick off, right? So we get a process creation. We see our OSEC agent run our pssuspend.cmd. And that calls our PowerShell script, which if we grab this guy here, this calls our PowerShell script that runs our pssuspend.ps1. Right, so then which then kicks off our pssuspend and our pskill. And of course, this is signed by the PowerShell. The PowerShell executable is signed by the Microsoft Corporation, which is within our allowed list to run. So let's say now I want to add Sublime to this list, right? So if I now parse out the event data.company of the Sublime software, let's go ahead and add this guy to our list. So go ahead and copy this guy, and if I go back onto my manager, go to var osec etsy list, and we'll open our software vendors. Let's add this vendor as part of our list, and I'll go ahead and add my colon there and save that off and restart our manager. Now if I get back onto my agent and let's try to run Sublime again. So if I open this guy up, we're now able to interact with Sublime because it is now an approved list. So I can enter in some text, please subscribe, and we're not getting it killed, and Wazuh is now not killing this process. Install something else. Let's try to install, let's say, Discord. If you haven't joined the Discord community, I advise you to. There's a link to our community down below where you can ask questions and just hang out with the community. But enough of that plug. Let's go ahead and download Discord for Windows. So you see our executable has been set up. If we download this guy, so you see now it's trying to start up, but we already see our balloon here as application has been suspended, and it will now be killed. So you see our application has now been killed. And that is because we have not added Discord as assigned as a allowed software. So now I can't even interact with it. So if we go to Wazuh here, let's filter on our Discord. Let's filter on our rule ID that triggers on software that has not been allowed per our policy. We're seeing a lot of Discord alerts. So if we hover over this guy, we see that the signature with the Discord executable is Discord Inc., right? But that's not a value that's added within our list. So when we try to install and run Discord, it bombs out on us and it gets terminated before we have the chance to interact with it. And so this is a really cool way for us to be able to implement a software policy on our Windows endpoints, and then not only implement a policy that alerts us when disallowed software tries to be ran on our Windows endpoints, but is actually able to kill that process from being created and disallow a user from even interacting with that at all. So again, I will link to Juan's GitHub in the description below. You can follow along and implement this yourself. And I appreciate you guys hanging out with me, and I will see you in the next one.